Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. And today is another bonus episode. I love these bonus episodes. I get to talk to some amazing people. I get to learn some amazing things. And I can see my mind expanding as I'm engaging people who are on the ground doing the real work. And on this bonus episode, we have Susan Frey. She is a member of the Thacker Pass Working Group, which is a group out in Nevada fighting to get justice as a lithium mine is being built in her community. And so we got to talk for a good hour. I really enjoyed the conversation. I learned so much. I think you will too when you hear this episode. We went through everything, what lithium is, why it's being mined so much. Fun fact, lithium is one of the minerals that is being touted as the way in which we're going to transition into a more sustainable green future. And so we got to talk a lot about how people who are trying to be more sustainable are mining and doing different activities that are in fact hurting very specific people. And so that was one thing I learned right off the bat, that as we're moving toward a green economy, a sustainable future, a cleaner environment in terms of how we produce energy and electricity, we are also compromising various communities by mining and by extracting the very minerals that are meant to take us there. So I learned that. That was mind-blowing. We got to do more about that and talk more about those kind of things. She talked about mineral rights and how corporations can come into communities and explore for minerals and buy mineral rights and be able to extract from those places throughout the West. I didn't know there was so much mining, so much going on in the West to begin with. And after talking to her, I just learned so much more about the difficulties and the challenges that people are dealing with all across the western part of the United States. So much mining, so many tribal nations, so much environmental injustice. And she is just one of many groups trying to push back on a very specific lithium mine that is in their community. And that's not to even mention all the other mines that are already there. So much is going on and so much is happening. And so on this episode of the podcast, I want you to listen and just learn from Susan as she shares and explains what it's like to live in Nevada, to deal with the kind of mining that's coming her way, and to try to fight for justice as she's doing it, and as her group is doing it, and as people in that community are all doing it. So just sit back, listen, learn. I know I did. And on this bonus episode, you're going to hear from Susan. You're going to learn about mining. You're going to learn about environmental injustice in the western part of the United States of America. And you're going to be enlightened as to how we can really make a difference in all of those issues. So without further ado, let's listen to Susan on this episode of the Environmental Justice Lab. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you for listening. I am here with a very special guest. Her name is Susan. She lives in Nevada and she is a part of the Thacker Pass Working Group. And we are talking about a lithium mine that is currently being proposed to be built in her community. If you don't know, out west, mining is a big industry, and with it comes a lot of issues, environmental issues, and in many cases, environmental justice issues. And so we're going to talk about that with our good friend, Susan. Susan, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, can you just give us your introduction? Tell us who you are, where you're from, how long have you been in Nevada? What do you do for a living? Whatever you want to share with us about you and your community, I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, sure. So I am a lifelong Nevadan. Um, I was born and raised in the Reno area, and I now live in a town called Orvada, which is about 40 miles north of Winnemucca, Nevada, which is, the closest, what we would consider a big city, but is still a very small town to most of the world. Um, my family and I run a farm and ranching operation here in Orvada. We have about 1,200 acres of alfalfa hay that we grow and about 500 head of cattle that we manage. And that's how we make our living up here. We are currently the third generation living on this farm, and we are raising the fourth generation, coming up, and some of those kids are getting a little bit older. It's a family operation, and some of them are starting to participate more and show some interest in taking over the operation. As the old folks retire, which doesn't really happen in farming. People never really retire, they're always here. uh, so my family has lived here for many generations. My in-laws have always lived in the same place. They've never they've never been anywhere else in the world, so they've called this home for their entire life. And a lot of our friends and neighbors that also live in this community have the same experience, multi-generational family farming and ranching operations that intend to stay here for, as long as they're able to.
Interesting. Interesting. So it's safe to say that where you live, where your family has raised you, and where these generations have inhabited is nice. I'm trying to envision this really pristine, very calm, lovely kind of green, just undisturbed area where you have animals, you have people kind of living off the land and just enjoying all that nature has to offer and enjoying the ways in which you can kind of live your lives free from a lot of outside intervention, a lot of outside influences. You're just there enjoying yourself with you and your family's family and all of your neighbors and friends all out here just kind of living that nice life we all dream about when we retire, to be
Yeah.
out and just enjoying what nature has to offer.
Yeah, that is definitely true. We have some of the darkest skies in the country here. On a moonless night, that phrase that you can see a blanket of stars. It is literally a sensation when you can step outside and look up and feel the weight of the sky above you, because it is so quiet and so dark here that there's just that piece of our community that we have enjoyed as it is for generations. And we know all of our neighbors. If someone's kid is acting up driving down the center road that everybody uses, and getting a little wild out there, we can call up someone's mama or someone's grandma and say, hey, you need to come out and get your kid.
Hmm.
Like, everybody knows everybody, and it's a lifestyle that everybody out here enjoys for sure.
Nice. And just to get this out here, I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast and people like me who may not know, I imagine a lot of indigenous uh, tribal nations out west, and we hear a lot about different things happening in those tribal nations out west. Are there indigenous groups in your community, near your community, where you currently are as well?
There is a tribe that is a neighboring community to ours. About 30 miles north of the town of Orvada is the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone Indian Reservation. So, they're neighbors. They live on the reservation mostly. And they're they're part of our community too, and this mine that is going to be going in is going to affect them also. And they have their own, um, their tribal council is also involved with trying to get what is best for their community as this mine goes forward. So we are both working to protect our communities, my community of Orvada and the tribal community. We are working separately to try to protect our communities, but also working toward the same goal of making sure that our voices are being heard. And as two community groups involved here, we definitely respect each other, and um, look forward to kind of being able to join forces and work together and make sure that everybody is getting heard in this, and able to work out any problems that are coming up.
Thanks for sharing the introduction, Susan. And let's just get right into this lithium project and start talking about it. You shared this with me on Instagram, and you talked about the issues that were happening there. And I was so excited to read about it and to learn about it and to be educated. I wanted to have you on the program to discuss it with our listeners because I think it's really, really, really important for them to know this. And so let's start from the beginning. So right now, there's a desire to mine lithium in your community. Can you tell us about why people would want to mine lithium? Like what's so valuable about it? How do we use it? Why is it so important for these corporations to come into your small community to get this lithium?
Okay, so lithium is a component in rechargeable batteries, the lithium ion battery. Why it has become so critical now is because of the green energy transition. Um, Countries trying to reduce carbon emissions. A big part of that is going to be moving from traditional vehicles that we're using now to electric cars and trucks and things like that. So to meet those energy transition goals, everybody is going to need a whole lot of lithium to do that, to make all of these batteries. And turns out that Northern Nevada has a whole lot of that lithium. Some of the biggest deposits, if not the biggest deposits in the world, are showing up here in our community in what is called the McDermott caldera, which is an ancient volcano that, because of the minerals of the area around that, have resulted in these huge deposits of lithium that everybody is after now. So it's been deemed a critical resource by the U.S. government. So there's a lot of bipartisan support to mine this and to have this be a United States domestic product, because most of the lithium that we use now is imported. So the way that they are um, kind of selling this is that for national security and for our clean energy transition, that the answer to that is to extract more lithium in the United States, so we're not depending on other countries to bring that in.
Very interesting. So along those lines, can you share with us how lithium is mined and extracted and what potential byproducts, pollution, impact you might anticipate if you're in the vicinity of a lithium mine?
Okay, so how lithium is going to be extracted from the Thacker Pass mine is a new technology, because this lithium is suspended in a clay product, or a clay, kind of mineral. So the way that they're going to be doing this is It will be an open pit mine. They're going to be digging up the material that will go through a crusher. It will be, screened out and crushed up fine enough to be made into a slurry. And it will go through a processing plant where it is going to go through a process of sulfuric acid leaching that leaches the lithium out of that clay suspension. And once they get the lithium out, then everything that is left over will be going into a tailings pile that will be dried and then formed into, something kind of resembling a mountain that will be piled up and shaped, potentially revegetated. They call this mining reclamation. There will be a liner underneath it that will hopefully prevent any toxic materials from leaching down through this tailings pile and hopefully prevent it from making any contact with groundwater or streams or anything like that. But the problem here is that this process has never been done before. This mine is going to be the first of its kind. And the way that the tailings facility has been designed is also going to be first of its kind for this kind of facility. So the way that the community views this is, our fear is that we're kind of the guinea pig here and just sort of hoping that this is going to work out how it is engineered to. And we don't really have anything that we can look back on and say, well, that worked in this area or that worked in this area and it was safe, so we're going to be okay. So some of the byproducts of this could be, they're going to have excess sulfuric acid. They're going to be using 2,900 tons of sulfuric acid every single day to, leach through these materials to get the lithium out. Part of the natural minerals that occur in these types of areas with lithium are uranium, antimony, arsenic. So these are all things that are currently bound up in the ground, but as they're going to be disturbed and brought to the surface and run through this processing and then moved over to a tailings facility, the concern is that those byproducts, such as uranium and antimony and arsenic, could then, move out of these tailings piles because they're no longer contained in the earth where they were before. And particularly sulfuric acid is used to leach minerals out of ground. So when we are combining the excess sulfuric acid with these tailings that have these toxic components to them, there is a good chance that these things could leach out of there and get into the groundwater and contaminate the environment that currently is pristine. It's not contaminated. So to counteract this, when they design these tailings piles, the bottom is lined with a plastic liner that supposedly has a life of about 400 years, but the idea is that it will be there in perpetuity and hopefully not leak, hopefully not fail. There's just a lot of things that could happen, could go wrong, and it seems as if the plan is for the best case scenario to happen, whereas there's always the possibility of the worst case scenario to happen. So I think that the concern for most of the community is that, one, this type of mining has never been done before in this area, and two, this type of tailings pile has never been done before in any area. It will be the first of its kind anywhere. So there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with that.
Wow. Okay. So there was a lot there that we have to unpack, and we don't have all day, but we could spend all day unpacking it.
For sure.
But let me just clarify a couple of things that you said just to make sure I got it all together. So this project consists of a mine where they're actually going to open up the ground and take lithium out. So there's a mine there. It sounds like there's also going to be a processing facility in the same location where they process the lithium that they've mined so that they can, in this case, purify it by running sulfuric acid through it, which is extremely harmful for anyone to even come in contact with. So hopefully the workers at this facility are protected as they process this lithium. And then there's also going to be a tailings pile, which when you describe it, it sounds like more of a landfill type of situation where you have excess material being dumped in an area that's dug out with a liner under it. And it's just filled in as the processing continues. And I'm imagining at some point it will fill up, it will be capped and covered. And then you'll have another one that you open up as you continue your mining and processing operations. And all this is happening in the same vicinity. Is that correct?
That is correct. And just one thing to go back to there is that where the waste rock is going to be dumped for the tailings facility, it's not going to be dug down into the ground, it's going to be piled up from ground level up. And the idea with hard rock mining is to create these waste rock facilities that in the end resemble, the mountain area around it. That's kind of the selling point when they're talking about mining and following it up with, talking about the plan for closing a mine and reclaiming the area, because this is done on federal ground and not private property. They have a responsibility to reclaim the area, so their waste rock pile in the end should resemble the surrounding mountain areas. So this will be piled up above the ground.
Okay. So that brings another complication into the matter because with most landfills and dump areas, you dig into the ground so you can confine the material to
Mm-hmm.
that location. If you're
Mm-hmm.
piling it up above the ground, how are you or how are they proposing to manage that material? For instance, when it rains or when a storm comes or if heavy winds come through, like, is there a plan for actually ensuring that that material and the contaminants in that material don't leave the pile and spread across the community or local areas? Like, how is that being managed?
So that's a great question. The tailings facility is engineered. It's an engineered, plan for this that had to go through the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection to get a permit to manage this facility. And because this type of tailings pile has never been done before, it's something called a clay filtered tailings stack. Because this is a new technology, the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection and Lithium Nevada Corporation have agreed to implement what they're calling an adaptive management plan with this, so that if It turns out that the facility is not operating as expected, as what was planned for in their engineering designs. The company then will have an opportunity to go back in with the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection and modify their plans, you know, reanalyze the situation, kind of try to figure out how to fix it. So the concern is that as they're going along here, if anything goes wrong, one, the company will be the one to identify it, not any kind of oversight agency. The oversight agencies rely on mining companies to provide them with that information on whether or not they are observing any pollution happening. And then the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection will allow the mining company to have an opportunity to correct that, to re engineer their plans. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. They have planned for the best case scenario, but there are no plans for the worst case scenario. The plan for a worst case scenario is to reanalyze the data, see if they can, fix anything. Then there's no plan that is just ready to go, ready to be enacted the second that anybody detects any potential contamination here.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Um,
Maybe we need to back up and kind of talk about how mining is done on federal lands in the West, compared to other areas, because it's a bit of a different process
yes,
in
let's talk
these
about it.
areas. Yeah, that might help people kind of understand how this is different here. So in the Western United States, these public lands are administered by the federal government. Nevada is mostly public land. I think 85% of the land in the state of Nevada is under the jurisdiction of the federal government, managed by the BLM or the US Forest Service. And those lands are set out for multi use. So things like recreation and grazing and wildlife, all of these different uses happen on these lands. But the use that is above all of the others are the mineral rights in these lands. And that was set out from laws from the 1800s that declared that minerals on public lands are the highest priority for the United States. And so somebody can come in and put their claim down on public lands, do drilling, see what sorts of minerals are under the ground there. In this case, they found lithium here as far as back to the 1970s. It's been prospected on in this area for lithium. And so a company can come in, find a mineral, and start making plans to make a mine. And per the federal government, that is going to be the priority over every other use that might be happening on this land. And that's what's happened here. So in this case, the federal government has allowed Lithium Nevada to use this land to create this mine that is going to be over several thousand acres. The tailings facility alone is about 1,300 acres of public land that they don't have to pay for. They didn't have to buy the land to do this. They don't have to pay any royalties to the United States on anything that they extract from this land. And the whole process is to get this mine going, get these critical minerals produced in the United States so that we can transition to green energy. So we are taking an area that was completely undisturbed and unpolluted and turning it into a huge mine, all in the sense of creating green energy. So it's a very significant disturbance on the level of this community, but as a whole, throughout the state and throughout the country, we are viewed as a necessary sacrifice to achieve the goal of reducing carbon emissions and creating more electric vehicles and things like that, that we need to meet these energy goals that the country has set out.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know any of that before you just told me. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because up until this point, I didn't know how mining and mineral rights and how corporations were able to come in and do their work and how they got approval to do such a thing. So for this project in particular, can you walk us through how this project came about? You talked about how they were, doing exploratory drilling and exploration in the area. Clearly, they found some lithium. This company, I think you called it Lithium Nevada, I guess sees the opportunity and they want to start the process of building a mine and processing that lithium to do whatever they want to do with the lithium to help us achieve our energy goals, as you say, because lithium is a mineral that is critical to that path towards green energy, sustainability, which is a whole nother conversation that needs to be had about who's paying the price for us to make these transitions. Help us understand, one, how they were able to, specifically them, Lithium Nevada, get these rights, how the communities surrounding this area were or were not engaged during that process, and how they were able to get permits and approvals to actually start doing what they're doing. Because I don't know if we all are familiar with that process, how long it takes, what's involved in it, and how the communities are brought in or not engaged at all when it comes to getting to a point where now we're going to build this mine. So take us through that if you can.
Sure. So back in the 1970s, what they call the mineral reserve was discovered in the area through exploratory drilling. A company, I'm not sure which one at this point back then, did some drilling and discovered some lithium. So through the next, 3 decades or so, there had been other companies coming in and buying those claims from whoever owned them at the time. So claims are a commodity that can be bought and sold on open market. So through this project, up until about 2010, the community here understood that there was a deposit of lithium in the area of Thacker Pass. We understood that different companies were interested in it, kind of checking it out, doing some exploratory drilling. But it really wasn't until more recently, kind of starting in 2018 or so, that the idea that there might actually be an active mine site in the area kind of started to come to fruition here. Because before that point, it was just a lot of exploration. And in the world of mining, there is usually, a whole amount of money to be made in exploratory drilling and buying and selling claims. There's a lot of prospecting there. But when Lithium Americas, which is a Canadian company, purchased this resource, they really started to get more serious about trying to actually develop a mine in the area. And at that point, they started to engage the community a little bit in starting to insert themselves into the community, starting to try to be, what they would call neighborly, introduce themselves. They started having some barbecues, kind of meet and greets. They had some information on what kind of lithium mining operation might be going on here, what that might look like. And back at that point, the community understood that Lithium Americas was interested in extracting ore from the mine and processing it elsewhere. So they were going to be coming in, potentially digging up this lithium rich material and transporting it out of this area to a processing facility and processing it. And, that was it. But we fast forward to 2020, and Lithium Americas and their United States company is called Lithium Nevada Corporation. They submit a EIS to the Bureau of Land Management. They need to submit an environmental impact statement to get this mine permitted. That's a really big step for a company. There are smaller permits and things happening before that, but by the time they get to submitting an environmental impact statement, this is serious. They're going ahead with this. So in the summer of 2020, their environmental impact statement was submitted to the Bureau of Land Management. In December of 2020, that environmental impact statement was released widely to the public. So at that point, the public could go through this, see what was happening, see what the plans for the mine are, really getting down into the minutia of what this might look like. So in December of 2020, that happened. A typical environmental impact statement is, somewhere around 1,000 pages. It's a huge document. And in January of 2020, just 1 month later, after the environmental impact statement was released for the public, which gives the public an opportunity to submit public comment on this, submit any questions, concerns, problems that the public might see going ahead. 1 month later, this environmental impact statement was approved, and the approval for this mine, the Thacker Pass project, hit the desk of the President of the United States, who at the time was Donald Trump. He stamped it with what they call a record of decision, so that approves the mine to go ahead 6 days before he vacated office, and they were off and running. So our community had been, up until that point, understanding that if there would be a mine here, they would be extracting the ore, taking it away for processing somewhere else. But by the end of 2020, within the span of 1 month, we began to understand that this was a much larger project than what we understood. There was a processing facility added to the plans. There was a tailings facility added to the plans. These were things that we had no idea were coming. And it was off and running. We didn't get a chance to even understand what was happening up until that point. And it wasn't until after the record of decision was given to the mine in January of 2021 that the community got together and said, holy smokes, this is happening. What are we going to do about this? We really didn't have a chance to understand anything before that. You have to, have a PhD in chemical engineering and mine engineering and things like this to understand these 1,000-page documents of all of the things that are going to be happening here. So you're just average kind of farming and ranching community. We don't have the resources to go through something like that. We don't have time to go through something like that. We're working our jobs all the time. Farming and ranching is a 24/7 job. And from the perspective of the people that live here, this just got kind of dumped on us with no input from our community. We didn't know what was coming, frankly. It kind of blindsided us. And because of the COVID pandemic, any public meetings that might have been happening before these decisions happened were done on virtual meetings. The community was not informed of these meetings in any kind of meaningful way. So the way that the Bureau of Land Management does these things is, say you're interested in a particular area and you are aware that there may be a mine site in that area someday. So you have to go to the website of the BLM office that oversees that area. You have to check the documents that they are releasing, looking for anything to do with that area. You can sign up to be emailed and notified of that. But, as a community member, you have to be doing the legwork to be going out to find those meetings, find those notices, decisions, intent from companies to drill or mine or explore in an area. There is no meaningful effort put in by the federal agencies to notify these communities of what is coming for them. They are doing the bare minimum to get these notices out there. And at the end of the day, they can kind of wash their hands of it and say, well, it's your responsibility as a citizen to pay attention to these things. We did what we needed to do. It's not our fault that you weren't paying attention. And that's how these things get, pushed through.
Wow. So we have a corporation that comes through. They try to ingratiate themselves with the community. They try to be good neighbors. They're telling the community one thing about what's going to happen there. They're saying, oh, we're going to have a mine here. We're going to mine for lithium. But that's where their conversation stops. And it's not until this impact statement comes out that anybody's aware that there's an actual processing facility, there's a tailings facility. And this statement, I'm sure it's not a coincidence that this statement gets released in December during the holiday season, during COVID, and it's approved a month later from the bottom all the way to the top at the president's desk for a statement that we know would take months to even understand the content of, let alone make a decision on it. And then you were talking about having a community that's an agricultural, farming, ranching community to try to engage the corporations and these agencies virtually, remotely, using presumably web conferencing, video conferencing, internet type of meetings in areas where I would imagine the internet is not as robust as other parts of the country. And so you're really just set up for complete failure from top to bottom. And this is going to happen. And it was a very concerted effort to ensure that was going to happen.
Yes. And this environmental impact statement, we should note, takes years for these companies to compile information. They do all of the studies, they do all of the baseline data, they do all of the modeling over years. They had been working on this for, the better part of a decade. They compile all the information into the environmental impact statement and submit it to the federal agency, in this case, the Bureau of Land Management. And the Bureau of Land Management goes through it, but there is nobody checking this data. There is nobody checking this information from the end of the federal government. Everything that they have received has been produced by the company that wants to mine in the area. So do you see how, the federal government does not have the resources to go back and kind of fact check these things that are being submitted to them on behalf of the mining corporation? It's a bit like the fox guarding the hen house, right? They are the ones providing all of the baseline data. They are the ones providing all of the modeling. The Bureau of Land Management, their job in this is to look through the report, potentially identify anything they might see as problematic, but really their function here is to receive the environmental impact statement and plan of operations for mining, go through it, submit it to the public for a public comment period that has been, reduced by the federal government. This is what they call fast tracking for getting new mines going. They submit that plan to the public to collect comments on that. They have a period where they will respond to some comments, depending on, whether they are scientifically valid comments or not. To submit a public comment on a document like this, a average member of the public might say something like, I don't like this mine, I don't want it to be here. Well, your public comment then is received, but if you are not commenting on, the science of the plan, the engineering, something in the operations, something like that, that can be answered in a scientific kind of way, they could receive thousands of comments saying, we, the public, we, the community members, don't want this here. They don't have to do what you want as a community. Those comments really don't count for anything. Their only goal in collecting those public comments is to identify any problems in that operation plan and to be able to fix those problems so that they can approve these plans, so they can move forward with creating a new mine in the area. Their standards are such that they never say no to mining. Their job is to permit mining in these areas. And they view the public comment period as a chance to fine-tune those plans and look for any problems so that they can submit the best possible plan for this. They have no interest in hearing from the community that lives around these areas on whether or not they want this mine going there. That's not a priority for them. So it's an interesting thing with public lands and with communities that live adjacent to these public lands. You can live right up on the fence line of this area, and they can submit this plan to you and show you what they're going to do right on the other side of the fence. And you are welcome to comment on those plans and say, I see a problem with your engineering and your clay filtered tailings stack, and I'm worried about this level of moisture in it, and I'm worried about this particular type of lining and whether or not we might have some groundwater contamination in the future from this. And they will accept those comments and maybe reply to them, usually telling you why you don't understand, the process here, and explain it to you. But as far as having any kind of voice in what is actually going to happen here, it is very minimal in mining on public lands.
Wow. Okay. That was a lot to take in and digest, but it's important for everybody listening to understand that this is the way that industries, this is the way that corporations, this is the way that large industry comes in and asserts itself and enables itself to do the things that bring it profit and to advance whatever their goals and objectives are for their corporation. Apart from the community concerns, apart from the community's desires even, they can come in and do what they believe is best for them. And if it's even remotely related to a goal that the government or the state might have, then it will get fast tracked and it will get pushed through no matter what. That is definitely the case all over the country, all over the world. And as a result of that, we can see how environmental injustice just runs rampant all over.
The system is broken.
Yes, the system is completely broken and it needs to be fixed. It's interesting. I'll say this one thing. When I hear and I see discussions about the way environmental justice is being promoted and how important it is to the current administration, to other public officials, to local governments, I don't know if this particular way of doing things is even in view when we talk about it. Like this whole apparatus, this whole system of industry and extraction and production is not being confronted when we talk about environmental justice in the kind of political government levels of discussions. We're talking about different objectives on the other end, but we're not talking about the people who are impacted as people are trying to get to those ends. And I think that's a really important point that you made about how those green energy goals, sustainability is the driving force behind a mine like this and all of the things that come along with it. And it is tragic that this is what we're seeing to get to what we believe would be a cleaner future. It's really frustrating to see.
I've seen, or rather heard, several political figures. I think the Secretary of the Interior brought it up a few times. I know that President Biden has brought up just this kind of general goal of understanding that we need mining and we need to extract these critical minerals to meet our goals. And they speak about how it needs to be done in a responsible way, an environmentally conscious way. Mm-hmm. And some key words that kind of come up here are phrases like community buy-in and community consent. The government floats these phrases out there as a general idea of how they would like to see these things done. The problem is that nobody has ever done it that way before, and there is no model to follow. And nobody knows what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing to achieve that community buy-in or to achieve that consent from a community. There's no guidance on that. And what we are doing here as a community, we're kind of fumbling along trying to figure it out, but our hope ultimately is that we will be creating some guidelines and we'll be creating a model for what this might actually look like on the ground, as opposed to just a concept that nobody really understands how to achieve. So when you look at a community on kind of a 50,000 or a 50,000 foot look from the top, you might see northern Nevada as a whole, which is heavily influenced by gold mining. And you can zoom in a little bit to Humboldt County, which is the county that houses Orvada and the Thacker Pass mine and the community of Winnemucca. And these are, looking a little bit closer, still very dependent on the mining industry, still very dependent on extractive industries. Mining and its associated professions are the number one employment in Humboldt County. And then you zoom in a little bit more into the city of Winnemucca, that are where most of these people live that work in mining. Most of the government officials, be it city officials or county officials, are affiliated in some way with the mining industry, are certainly supportive of the mining industry as a whole because it is our number one economic factor in our county. And then you zoom in a little bit more into the town of Orvada, that is right next to where this Thacker Pass mine is going to be going into. And it's a little bit different at this level because this community is dependent on farming and ranching. So we see it as we're the farmers and ranchers out here. And for us to be seen as in any way critical of the mining industry is sticking our neck out there a little bit. It's a little bit, it's hard to be viewed as anti-mining in a county, in a state that is very pro-mining. And it's hard to bring up these concerns for this new type of mine and kind of be taken seriously because the county and the state, we're already used to gold mines. We've been doing that for a long time. So from the view of city officials in the city of Winnemucca, county officials in Humboldt County, state officials for the state of Nevada, for the most part, everybody is excited about this mine going in, and they have been in conversation with the mining company for years leading up to this. And everybody's really excited about the economic benefits and being the leader for the country in the green energy transition, and everybody's really on board with that. But when you really get down to the smaller scale of the community that is right next to it, everyone just kind of forgets that we're here. all the way through the governments, all the way to the mining company, until we got together and stood up and said, hey, wait a minute, this mine is going to affect our little community in these ways. And what are you going to do about that? Up until that point, nobody had talked to us about any of that. Those little fine details that tend to get overlooked as these things are being permitted and as they're coming online.
Wow. So we're running out of time. We could be talking about this for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So just I want to end with this question though. So right now, with everything that you know, with everything you've seen, the people you've spoken to, what is happening now? What are the community groups or anybody who's affected? How are they responding? What are they doing? What are you doing and your group doing? And how can we assist you in those efforts? We being the listeners, people listening to this right now, what can we do to be of some help as you continue to work towards what's best for your community?
Oh, that's just such a big question, and I think it could set us off for another hour here. But I'll try to get down to the nitty gritty of it. So I don't think that we've even had a chance to talk about what the anticipated impact of this mine is going to be for this small community. So on a larger level, there is, most of the state and county, everybody is looking forward to the economic benefits from this mine, the tax dollars that will be generated, the jobs that will be created, things like that. But at the community level, we are expecting to see anywhere from 60 to 200 trucks daily, one way, making a trip out to the mine to deliver different um, chemicals and materials that they will need to, do their mining every day on a road that currently has an average of about 100 vehicles total per day. And this road goes right in front of the elementary school for the little community of Orvada. So all of our kids are going to be steps away from this highway that is going to be transporting materials like gasoline, diesel fuel, molten sulfur, caustic soda, lime, things like that are going to be just going zip, 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 zip right by the school all day long. And nobody talked to the community before these plans were made. We could have made suggestions for this. We could have tried to fix these problems. So where we find ourselves now is coming around at the end of this and trying to work with the mine to come up with solutions for these problems. So one of the really good things that has happened from this is that we did create the Thacker Pass Working Group to give our community a voice to talk with the management of the mine, bring up all of the issues that we see happening, and give us both an opportunity to mitigate those things. So, a big concern was the elementary school being right by this road where 60 to 200 trucks a day would be going right by, hauling all sorts of hazardous materials. The mine answered our concerns with an opportunity to build a new elementary school for our community, to relocate the school so that the kids would be safe. And we took them up on that opportunity. So that's something that we're working on together now, to get a new school built for our community that is going to be a safer location for the kids. Another problem that we identified was a particular intersection that needed to have a left-hand turn lane to make it safer for these trucks that are going to be bringing all these materials. And with our Thacker Pass Working Group, we were able to get plans through the Department of Transportation for Nevada and get that intersection fixed. And now we have that turn lane that we need to be safer in our community and safer for these mine employees. So we are making some progress on these issues that are very tangible things that we can change. But there are other issues that are, kind of harder to pin down. Things like noise and dust and light pollution, any kind of air pollution or smells that people might, pick up on. These are harder things to work toward with a community and a mine working together. And they're things that are supposed to be regulated by environmental protection agencies. But again, these agencies are relying on the corporations to give them these reports on these sorts of things. They're not out there doing the work. So we're having to come up with citizen monitoring groups and things like that, we're out there making sure that any violations for dust, they call it fugitive dust out here, is, documented and reported. And we are just being vigilant and trying to stay on top of all that stuff and really trying to make this work in a way that the mine is coming in and doing their thing, and we are trying to protect our community as best we can. But it's taken a lot from this community to show up and do that work. Our group alone has put in hundreds, if not thousands, of hours at this point in sitting down and going through these things, either in closed meetings with our community members, or in meetings with our working group that includes the management of the mine. We are attending every public meeting that we can. We are speaking to people and trying to spread the word about what we're doing here. And it's been a huge commitment from the people of this community to try to protect what we have out here. And going forward, I envision us creating the blueprint for how a mine can come into a community and work with them to deal with these issues on the front end of planning, instead of playing catch up after everything is already in motion. And going forward, there's a lot of talk in political places and Congress especially about mine permitting. And there is a lot of concern that it takes too long to get these mines permitted. It takes too long to get them built and up and running. And so there's a bit of a push to see how they can expedite this process. And some congressional members are advocating to take out some of the environmental regulations to speed this process up, to make it easier for these mining companies to come in and put their claim out and get a mine going. And I think that's the wrong way. I think the way that they should be focused on this is to add more public engagement, add more community coordination and cooperation with these corporations so that they can reach that point of community buy-in or community consent earlier. Because the thing that is holding them up is getting everything done behind closed doors and then having to reveal it to the public at the very last moment. And at that point, they are hoping to not be sued by anybody because that is what's holding them up. If they could address these issues before that point, they could potentially avoid any of that litigation and avoid any of that pushback and bad publicity and things like that that's holding them up in that way. So we don't need deregulation for permitting. We need more planning and more coordination with communities.
And I completely agree. The one thing we don't need is to make what just happened to this community easier to do to other communities and faster and more rapid degradation of their lands and of their environments. And so I completely agree. I mean, getting the public engaged sooner, going along with them as the planning, as the discussions on the front end are happening would be best for everyone. And you're right. Actually getting the buy-in from the community in the beginning will actually expedite the process because now everybody is fully aware and fully invested in whatever's happening and making those adjustments and those changes to ensure that the environment's protected and that the mining is done responsibly, as opposed to trying to come in now after you've done all of your analysis, done all of your research, written all of your statements, then trying to go back and trying to revise and fix things because the community now sees and understands what's happening and they have objections to it. So you're completely right about that. And I think that's a testament to any kind of project in any community with anybody, that you engage them first before you begin doing anything that you think is worthwhile, because the community might disagree with what it is or how it's being done. And you need to know that at the beginning before you go through all of that and then have to fight them to even start the project you're trying to work on. So I completely agree. My time is up in about 10 minutes. I want to give you the floor right now to share whatever you want to share with all of us listening, because we've all been enlightened and educated with what you've shared so far. And so to end this episode, whatever you want us to know, whatever you think we can do to help, I want you to just have the floor to share it.
Yeah, so right now, Congress is going back and forth about this idea of mining reform. And some members of Congress, they bring this up every now and then, and depending on which side of the aisle or which state that someone might be from, they're either supportive of mine permitting reform or they're going to be against it. So I think you brought up earlier that what can the rest of the country do about this? You're not out living in the West, you're not living close to public lands. How can other people have any kind of influence here? And so recently, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia brought up a mining reform type of bill that was supported by Nevada's congresswoman. These are all Democrats supporting these things, which kind of flies in the face of, who you might think might be more environmentally supportive. But they brought up a bill that would deregulate some of this permitting to get these mines going on faster. And I think it's important for people in every state to contact their representatives and make it known that if you support any kind of mining reform, that the focus should be about, creating more stakeholder engagement, creating a community review process, supporting funding for the federal agencies that are in charge of these things, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, supporting a budget that allows these agencies to do the job that they need to be doing. The Department of Environmental Protection, they need funding to be able to come out and check on this data that any mine is reporting to them. They need support to do these things. We, as a society, assume that we are being protected by the Environmental Protection Agency, when in reality, the Environmental Protection Agency is getting all of their information from the corporations that are doing this pollution. We need to better understand what these agencies need to be able to do the job that they were intended to do. And we need to advocate for our communities or communities across the country to get that support that we need going forward. And we need to make sure that areas that are generally, not heard from when these things are being planned. I bet nobody's ever heard of Orvada, Nevada, but probably plenty of people have heard of the Thacker Pass lithium mine. In general, people understand that this product comes from somewhere, but they don't really understand that it comes from a place where people live, a place that people care about, and that people there want to protect that place, and they need support to do that. And I do believe that we can move forward with increased extractive practices that we are going to need for the green energy transition, but we just have to do it in a better way. And what we've set out to do here is to do that in a better way. But these communities need support from the rest of the country to do it this way. A lot of times these areas get discounted from people saying, well, people just have that NIMBY attitude, right? The not in my backyard kind of attitude with these things. And people need to understand that there's a good reason for that in these areas. We have legacy mines that have been here for 100 years, 50 years, that did come in and pollute these areas and create huge environmental catastrophes in these areas that nobody has ever come back and cleaned up. And people are still suffering from that to this day. So when they start talking about bringing in more mining, making more disturbances, potentially releasing more toxic elements that could eventually leach into the groundwater, and taking an area that is essentially pristine and turning it into a less pristine version of that, yeah, people are going to be a little bit upset about that. And it's not just a matter of not wanting change, it's a matter of wanting to make sure that the communities that live in these areas already can continue to live here and breathe fresh air and have clean water, while the country is also getting what they need to create the green energy that is going to make better air and a better future for the rest of the country. We need to make sure that everybody is being heard here and that people are choosing to listen to the local voices that have that valuable information that can make these projects better. I think I'm done. I'm all out of voice for today.
No, you did great. So I completely agree with everything that you've just said. I'm going to start looking more into these kind of things as well. I would encourage everybody listening to educate yourself and be more aware of these types of issues. I don't know much about mining. I don't know much about the western part of the United States, but I'm willing to learn. And I'm so thankful, Susan, that you came on the podcast to help teach us and enlighten us to these issues, because without your expertise and your experiences, we wouldn't have the knowledge that we have now, and we wouldn't be able to actually take the kind of action that may or may not, hopefully, can be helpful in allowing for these things to happen in a more equitable, more environmentally conscious, friendly, just way. And so with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast with me.
Dr. Joseph, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to speak on these issues.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And that is our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast, where we are for the people and for the planet.